Hi, sorry this took so long, but I wanted to explain why I believe that there are some differences, or I have some, let's say, I disagree with the idea that Ted Kaczynski and Friedrich Nietzsche are opposed. To give some context, a few weeks ago, Balaji went on one of Erik Torenberg's podcasts and presented our current situation, right? We can either be pro-tech or it can be anti-tech, deceleracionists or accelerationists. And he presented those ideas as being following Uncle Ted or Uncle Fred. Uncle Ted being Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, or Uncle Fred being Friedrich Nietzsche, specifically with his idea of the Ubermensch.
This is the fundamental difference between what I call Uncle Ted and Uncle Fred. Uncle Ted is Ted Kaczynski. It's a Unabomber, it's a doomer, it's a decelerator, the degrowther who thinks we need to go back to Gaia and Eden and become monkeys and live in the jungle like Ted Kaczynski, right? The Unabomber style. Uncle Fred is Friedrich Nietzsche, right? Nietzschean, we must get to the stars and become Ubermen and so on and so forth. This, I think, is going to become, and I actually tweeted about this years ago before the current AI debates, between anarcho-primitivism, degrowth, deceleration, okay, on the one hand, and transhumanism and acceleration and human 2.0 and human self-improvement and make it to the stars on the other hand, this is the future political axis.
I want to talk about why I think that framing is slightly incorrect. First of all, let's talk about Kaczynski, whom I think Balaji gets correct in his characterization. Ted Kaczynski, Dr. Ted Kaczynski, is the author of something called Industrial Society and Its Future, which is now known as the Unabomber Manifesto. It was a text that was published in a few newspapers after Kaczynski sent bombs all over the United States in order to advance his aims, which was to bring about a revolution that would essentially tear down technology and industrial society. As the first famous line of the manifesto reads, "The Industrial Revolution and its consequences have been a disaster for the human race." He believed that we were in a dire situation, that industrial society caused widespread psychological suffering and severe damage to the natural world. And so, based on this assessment, he outlines what he thinks are sort of the overall issues, right? One of them is over-socialization. When he speaks about over-socialization, this is the idea that we are socialized so much that we can only respect the norms of our society. And these norms are fundamentally, I suppose, anti-human or anti-his idea of what humans should be. Let's talk about it. Point 25 of the manifesto. The moral code of our society is so demanding that no one can think, feel, or act in a completely moral way. Over-socialization could lead to low self-esteem, a sense of powerlessness, defeatism, guilt, etc. And this is something that he actually relates to leftism a lot. Kaczynski does not like the leftists. And the solution to over-socialization is the following of the power process. The power process is defined by three characteristics, right? Let me just pull it up. I think it's note 33. It is related to the need for power. First is a goal. Second is an effort. Third is attainment of that goal. And fourth is autonomy. This is what composes the power process for Kaczynski. And this is important because when you have the power process, it's how you find meaning. And what modern society has done, according to Kaczynski, is alienate us from our power process by replacing our true goals with what he calls surrogate activities. Surrogate activities are things like the rat race, whatever accomplishments that you want to, specifically societally based accomplishments. Big title jobs, probably doing this video is probably me doing a surrogate activity. Social media, I think he probably would call a surrogate activity as well. So all of these are examples of surrogate activities, things that conceal the fact that our power process has been hijacked. What he proposes is this staunchly anti-tech solution, which is a return to nature. And he lived by that rule. He lived in the cabin somewhere and lived essentially self-sufficiently. And this return to nature is where you actually are able to engage with the power process. And when you engage with the power process, you have freedom and autonomy, and you find meaning. I will note that he does make a difference between small tech and organizationally dependent tech. He's okay with small tech, which are things that you could do by yourself, and is opposing organizational dependent technology, which requires infrastructure to run. So that's Kaczynski. Next, we have Nietzsche. I think it's important to understand when he writes this. He writes this in the 19th century, and you may be familiar from your Philosophy 101 class, this idea that God is dead, which is this, great quote from Nietzsche's writing that you may know. And in the wake of God's death, the Ubermensch presents a new way to find meaning in a place where essentially our main source of meaning is now gone. Zarathustra, the main character, presents a few different ideas as to how to sort of self-create, become better, not in a self-help way, but truly like in a philosophical way. What Nietzsche is concerned about is removing oneself from the prisons of Western philosophy and Judeo-Christian thought. I think he sees a lot of limitations from those ideas and, traditional morality, the societal norms, the inhibitions that come with that. And that's his first thing, right? Here are some notes from the book about some of the main themes as to what the Ubermensch, or the Superman, should do. In his presentation of this dichotomy, Balaji seems to characterize Nietzsche as being aligned with the transhumanists and posthumanists, which are pro-tech, accelerationists, or techno-optimists. And what I want to do with this second part is explain why that's not exactly the case, and why Nietzsche is actually closer to Kaczynski than we think. So the first part is the overcoming the self, which is really about overcoming the limitations of traditional morality, societal norms, and sort of these personal inhibitions that come with it. And what's interesting to me about this idea is how close it is to this concept of over-socialization. When you're over-socialized, you're never really in touch with that fundamental idiosyncratic belief or ideas. Rather, you follow what society tells you. You are over-socialized. And there's a true connection between this overcoming of the self and over-socialization. I think I described the death of God briefly. This creating new values, I think, is also quite interesting because this is, related to the need for new thought, new ideas, not adhering to the moral codes of one society, which I think is also related to over-socialization. My main beef is with this idea here called the affirmation of life. The problem with the idea that Nietzsche is pro-tech, specifically as it relates to transhumanism and posthumanism, is that Nietzsche is staunchly pro-body in the text. Whereas when you look at the ideas of transhumanism and posthumanism, there's a lot of, let's call it, desire to overcome the limitations of the human body. specifically through cyborgian additions or intellectual augmentation. When we think about the idea of putting one's brain into a cloud or into a computer and no longer needing a body, right? Uploading your consciousness to the internet or whatever you want to call it, all these post-humanist ideas imply a separation between one's intelligence, one's consciousness from one's body. And Nietzsche, let's go to the section of the despisers of the body, is quite clear that this is not possible. I am body entirely and nothing beside. Soul is only a word for something in the body. And so to the post-humanists who want to leave the body and upload one's intelligence or one's consciousness to some other place, some other digital place, I answer, in the words of Nietzsche, your little intelligence, my brother, which you call spirit, is also an instrument of your body, a little instrument and toy of your great intelligence. And so I see the affirmation of life, this embrace of the bodily reality of existence, as being antithetical and opposed to the transhumanist and posthumanist ideas. Eternal recurrence doesn't really apply here, so we'll skip that one. The last thing I want to present here are these three ideas: will to power, self-mastery, and independence. Because, as you can tell by their names, desire for power, desire to control oneself, one's desires, and independence, the desire to be free from external influences and societal pressures, that is actually highly like what Kaczynski describes as his ideal state for finding meaning. And so in many ways, I don't see these two as being very opposed. Kaczynski's ideal man, the man living in a state of nature with only small tech, is one that is fully in line with the ideas of will to power, self-mastery, and independence. Actually, that individual is actually truly overcoming the self, creating new values, and is in true affirmation of life. I actually see the Ubermensch. Not that Kaczynski's position is actually, I favor it, but I see that his ideas about the power process and what it takes to find meaning, I see them related to the proposition of Zarathustra in the book. I also see a strong opposition between the new ideas of what our sort of modern, let's call it digital Superman will be, as opposed to the ideas of affirmation of life that are in Nietzsche's text. And this is why I think this dichotomy doesn't really work. Uncle Ted and Uncle Fred are not opposed. They're actually much closer than we think.